Chairman, thank you. Commissioner Summers, I want to focus on CFTC. What was the conflict of interest that Chairman Gensler caused to recuse himself 5 days after the filing of the bankruptcy?
I'm not familiar with the specifics or what he was thinking when he decided to recuse himself.
It was not a discussion among the commissioners?
There was not a discussion.
But then there was a vote, I assume, that selected you to be the lead on MF Global?
Yes, sir. The other 3 commissioners voted.
But no discussion about why Chairman Gensler was no longer going to act in that capacity?
No, sir.
Prior to the bankruptcy of MF Global, if looking back, it seems clear that MF Global was under financial stress. You can look at stock prices, the New York Fed reaction. Did the CFTC take any action to enhance its surveillance or to encourage others to enhance its surveillance prior to the filing of bankruptcy?
In the week leading up to the bankruptcy filing, we had people on the ground at MF Global. Our staff in Chicago was there on the ground. But the numbers and what we look at are whether or not the firm is capitalized and whether they have the money to meet their segregated obligations to their customers. And the data that was provided to us from MF Global showed that they were in compliance up until the very last few days.
When you say you had CFTC personnel on the ground, was that an increase in personnel on the ground? I mean, did you detect that there might be something wrong and reacted or not?
We actually had people at MF Global's offices in Chicago and New York, and that's not typical.
And when did that occur?
The
increase
prior.
The week prior.
Uh-huh.
When over 99% of MF Global's accounts were commodity accounts, did CFTC have an opportunity to prevent SIPA from taking over the bankruptcy? And why was MF Global's holding, the holding company, why was it allowed to file Chapter 11? Both of those instances seem to me to have preferred the general creditors over the segregated account holders. Did CFTC have a role in altering the decisions that were made that allowed those two things to happen, the kind of SIPA's involvement, in my view, to the detriment of the segregated account holders, and the holding company-wide bankruptcy filing? Both those work to the detriment, it seems to me, to the segregated account holders. Did the CFTC have a role to play in those decisions?
Although I was not privy to the conversations that led up to MF Global being placed into a SIPC bankruptcy proceeding, it is my understanding that when that is done, and the SEC has the ability to place a entity that they believe is either in financial distress or is approaching financial distress, they have the ability to refer them to SIPC. We do not have that same authority if an entity is a standalone FCM versus a broker-dealer FCM. But it is my understanding that even though the entity was a joint broker-dealer FCM and placed into a SIPA proceeding, that all of the Commission's regulations, Part 190, bankruptcy rules and regulations, those all apply, just as they would if it were just a standalone FCM and those, were not in a...
Commissioner, is what you're telling me then is that my understanding that, or my suggestion that those segregated account holders were harmed by that decision is not true?
That is, my understanding is that it is not true.
Did that discussion occur prior to the filing of bankruptcy? Was CFTC engaged in this conversation about how this bankruptcy was going to occur?
The Commission was informed that MF Global was going to be placed into a SIPA liquidation. We were not involved in whether or not that decision should be made.
Who at CFTC was handling the decisions related to enhanced supervision and the kind of bankruptcy or the the bankruptcy proceedings. Who at CFTC was handling those decisions prior to the bankruptcy?
Up until November 3rd, Chairman Gensler was directing those decisions.
And since you've told me you don't know what his conflict of interest was that caused him to recuse himself 5 days after the bankruptcy, you don't have an opinion as to whether that same conflict of interest would have accrued prior to the filing of bankruptcy? Do you know if something happened between the filing of bankruptcy and the 5 days later when he recused himself that created a conflict of interest? Or is it the same conflict of interest that was there prior to bankruptcy and subsequent to bankruptcy?
I do not know.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Senator